All right, last time we were talking about the income distribution as a potential market failure. Again, very subjective because income can be distributed in an inequitable way or an equitable way, depending upon who you talk to. The natural justice proponents, as we saw, believe income distribution should be based on a worker's marginal revenue product. That is, it should be based on how much value you create in the marketplace with your production. So if I'm a manufacturing worker on an assembly line and I produce widgets, a made up good, let's say I produce 20 widgets an hour, and those widgets are valued in the marketplace at $1, then that means I generate 20 times 1, $20 an hour. That would be my marginal revenue product. That would also mean that my employer would be willing to pay me up to $20 an hour. Now, obviously, he would want to pay me the lowest amount possible to get that $20 of marginal revenue product. But in competitive labor markets, that wage would get bid up to a higher value, in some cases even reaching $20, the full marginal revenue product. Now, I can increase my marginal revenue product and thus my income if I become more productive, produce more widgets per hour, and or produce a more valuable good. If the widgets become valued at $2 an hour, well, that doubles my marginal revenue product. Even if I'm still producing 20 widgets, if they go from $1 to $2, then my marginal revenue product went from 20 to 40. So there are two routes to increasing marginal revenue product and income. It is increased productivity and or increased value via price. The more productive the worker becomes, the higher the worker's income. That's why you go to college. That's why you get experience. That's why you work hard, because you're doing the things that increase marginal revenue product, ultimately generating more value for your employer per hour, which is then revealed to you in a higher wage, a higher willingness for the employer to pay for you. It's like any other product. The employer is just buying a worker because they see value in that worker. Think of it like a consumer. If a consumer goes to a store and they see generic brand cereal versus Kellogg's cereal, they see more value with Kellogg's. So they're willing to pay more for Kellogg's. It's the same thing with workers. If an employer sees two workers and they see one is more valuable in terms of marginal revenue product than another, then that firm will be willing to pay more for that more valuable worker. This provides a strong material incentive to increase a worker's productivity. And you can do that by getting more education, what we call human capital, by increasing the amount of work. So if you work harder, for example, by increasing the worker's experience. The more we do something, the better we get at it. And it can also come from more capital equipment, more tools, machinery for the worker to complement their labor, and better technology. Notice that increasing the worker's productivity and thus their wage is going to be a consequence of both the worker and the firm, right? It's like yourself. You go out and you get an education and you work hard, but then you go to work for a company that provides you a lot of good equipment, a lot of good tools, a lot of good training, and the best technology to complement your labor to maximize your productivity. It's a relationship that is designed to increase marginal revenue product, and presumably both the firm and the worker can benefit from that higher productivity. But what about those workers that can't generate a high enough marginal revenue product to create an income that will keep them out of poverty, the needy? And there's many reasons that someone might fall into this category. But once they do, there has to be some way of remediating the poverty. And for the natural justice proponents, it's private charity that best serves this purpose. Remember, these proponents are free marketeers. They're capitalists. They see that system as the optimal one and not only want it to allocate goods and services in the product markets, but they want the market to allocate income in the labor markets. And so for them, you don't want to interfere in that market process by creating any sort of government intervention, which would be public charity, such as welfare or food stamps or social security or unemployment compensation, because that will disrupt the productive market forces that will elevate everybody's standard of living. So they choose to deal with the impoverished through private charity. And the belief is that once people are productive enough to satisfy their own basic needs, that they will see value in a lot of things, including being charitable. And there is evidence to support this. You have the most dollars flowing into charity from the richest people. So Bill Gates, for example, he doesn't need any more houses or cars or anything like that. He's already satisfied all those things, those desires. So what he does is he creates the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and funnels a lot of his money to students and various charities and so forth. And you would, according to the natural justice proponents, have a lot of that charity flowing to the neediest. And some of you might say, well, not everybody's going to be charitable, and not everybody cares enough about other people. And that's true. But even if you don't care about people, you may still have a strong incentive to contribute to private charity. If you are a very wealthy person that has to go through an impoverished neighborhood to get in your front door, then you might want to get rid of that poverty for selfish reasons. I don't want to look at those people. Those people are dirty, or I feel like I'm going to get accosted. Whatever the reason is, even if it's selfish, you have an incentive to get them off the street, to get them into a place where they're out of your way. So greed and altruism can both create private charity, ironic as it is. That's the natural justice proponents. One other thing on that, they would say that when you look at the desire to help people through government programs, that implies people have a desire to help people. So even if there were no government programs, they would still have the desire to help people. Charity emerges with or without government intervention. Of course, not everyone agrees with the natural justice proponents, because this does create inequities in income. Some people are going to make millions a year. Major League Baseball players and NFL football players, some musicians, actors, and other people are going to make barely minimum wage. Burger flippers at McDonald's, cashiers at Walmart, lettuce pickers in the agricultural sector. And that kind of inequity is perceived by the opponents of natural justice as market-based but unfair. So it becomes to the opponents a market failure. And part of the reason they see it as a market failure is because they don't believe that the marginal revenue product that the worker produces is solely a result of that worker's efforts. They might concede, the less socialist of the natural justice opponents might concede that if marginal revenue product were solely a result of your efforts, if it was just you work harder and get more, and I work less hard and get less, many of them might say that would be fair. And in that case, the marginal revenue product could be a reasonable, equitable metric for allocating income. But they say, in fact, it's not just you that creates marginal revenue product. You have complementary resources that you didn't contribute yourself. Access to education, for example. People that grow up in the suburbs, they didn't choose to grow up there, but yet they benefit from easier access to education than if you grew up in the inner city, where you might have less easy access to education. People that grow up in the big city have more public infrastructure to support their ambitions than somebody that grows up in a small, poor city. It goes beyond this. Some people are born with a predisposition for being productive. You might be physically gifted. You might be mentally, intellectually gifted. And that will allow you to achieve a higher marginal revenue product. But you may not have created that. And consequently, you should not, according to the natural justice opponents, get to benefit from that. They also take exception to the idea that the needy will be served through private charity. They say that private charity may be insufficient, not so much because people don't care about the needy, they may, but because of a free rider problem. Sociologists have studied this effect with crime. If someone is in a busy street and they get accosted, mugged by a criminal, nobody calls 911, even though you've got dozens of witnesses. Well, why don't people call 911? Why don't they provide aid to somebody in need? And the answer is because they think somebody else will do it. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't want that person to get help. If they knew that other people weren't going to call 911, then they would call 911. But they believe that someone else will take care of the problem. So the same idea applies to charity. If you believe there's a free rider issue, that other people will be charitable so you don't have to, then there's an insufficient amount of charity available. One of the most influential natural justice opponents is John Rawls. He wrote extensively about the unfair income distribution in free market capitalist economies. He puts forth a veil of ignorance, which is a hypothetical scenario in which people would be born without any clue of the advantages or disadvantages that lay before them. He says you are behind this veil, right? A veil covers your face. You're behind this veil, and then proposed one of two worlds. You can either go to a world of complete income equity where everybody has the same distribution as you do, or you can go to a world that has inequity, where you may hit it big and happen to be in the rich class, but you may be poor and impoverished and not even be able to meet the needs of life. It is his contention that a rational person behind this veil would always choose the equal distribution of income to ensure they're not going to be impoverished. A rational person would see the inequitable distribution as a gamble not worth undertaking because you might starve to death. As a result, he thinks society should pursue an equal distribution of income. So we've talked a lot about income in the form of wages, but income can also be in the form of profits. And that's always the case in a free market capitalist system, where the worker brings their labor to the production plant and gets compensated with wages, but the entrepreneur brings their acumen at organizing resources and gets compensated with profits. The natural justice proponents will say that profits are reward for risk-taking. In essence, it is the entrepreneur that puts the resources on the line with no certainty of profit. Because if I go out and start a coffee shop, I have to pay the workers for their labor. I have to pay the rent on the land, and I have to pay interest on the loans that I take out, regardless of whether I can actually create a profit or not. Many businesses don't generate a profit, but the other resource owners get compensated. So profits are the reward when you're taking that risk. And the natural justice opponents don't necessarily see it this way. Some of them are Marxists and see profits as exploitation of the worker. Remember the idea that the only value embedded in a product comes from the labor, which means anything that is extracted in the form of profit is exploitation, right? It is expropriation of what is rightfully the workers. But not all natural justice opponents ascribe to the exploitation theory. They may be more like John Rawls, who simply contends that it is a better outcome to have a more equal distribution, not necessarily that an unequal distribution is exploitative. Lastly, Arthur Okun, famous economist that was an opponent of natural justice, he acknowledged that when you try to rectify the market imbalances, inequities, you create a leaky bucket. If the government, for example, is going to create a welfare program to channel money from the rich to the poor, some of that money is going to leak out in the distribution, which means we have to acknowledge the cost of redistribution.